Three men in the open sea at night, desperately trying to stay alive and hoping for a miracle to save them. Today's story is a situation that nightmares are made of. But let's explore just how this terrible situation unfolded, who was responsible, and what happened next. Bembridge, if you know it, it's a delightful spot on the east coast of the Isle of Wight, with a wonderful natural harbour, and it's super popular for sailing. 36-year-old Rupert Saunders, who lived in Tooting in South London, he owned a 26-foot classic yacht called Ouzo with his brother Jamie, which they kept in Bembridge. They'd owned the boat since their dad Charles bought it in 1980, and it was a beautiful boat, lovingly looked after. Another fine place to sail is Dartmouth on the southwest coast of England, and Rupert was looking forward to taking part in the annual Dartmouth Regatta when we pick up the story today in the summer of 2006. Rupert was a highly experienced sailor, having loads of practical experience, as well as having trained as a skipper, yacht master, and maritime radio operator. On Sunday the 20th of August 2006, he headed south from London to Bembridge, from where he planned to sail west to Dartmouth for the regatta. And with fair conditions forecast, this trip should take about 8 to 10 hours. His brother Jamie had been due to join him, but then at late notice he couldn't make the trip, as he had to hold back some annual leave for his wedding. But Rupert was joined by some good friends, and they were looking forward to having a great time. One of these was 35-year-old Jason Downer, who Rupert met at school and who had sailed on Ouzo countless times. He too is a very competent sailor, having trained as a skipper, and he regularly raced a 38-foot yacht. They were joined by 36-year-old James Meeby, who Rupert had met at university. Initially fearful of the sea, he had overcome this, and like Jason Downer, he trained as a skipper and was a regular competent racer on a number of yachts. The three friends had all raced at the Dartmouth Regatta before. They took their sailing seriously, but they also enjoyed the after-sailing, the partying at regattas such as Dartmouth. Like all very good sailors, the three were always respectful of the sea, and Rupert was very safety conscious, insisting that life jackets were always worn by all the crew on Ouzo, even below the decks, and there was a strict ban on drinking alcohol on board. The group arrived in Bembridge around lunchtime on the 20th of August, but they were unable to sail as they'd missed the high tide, and there was no water where Ouzo was moored. So the three friends visited the local yacht chandlers, where they bought some equipment for the boat before making their final preparations for the trip ahead. They finally set sail that evening at about 8:30 p.m, heading south along the east coast of the Isle of Wight towards St Catherine's Point, and then away from the shelter of land to the open sea. At first it was a struggle against the tide, but in Sandown Bay about 10:30 p.m, the tide turned, and from there they made good progress out into the English Channel. Just after 10:30 p.m, Jason Downer texted his partner, saying they'd started their trip and he was about to go down and get some rest. This was standard procedure for the crew on the Ouzo, where the normal watch arrangement was for two of the crew to be in the cockpit at all times sailing the yacht, whilst any others on board rested below. On a short trip like this, they would rotate every hour. It was a relatively simple journey, just heading south and then throwing a right turn to head west, and the crew generally navigated using a handheld GPS navigator and local charts, keeping a note of the yacht's position every 30 minutes in a logbook. But that text from Jason to his partner was the last anyone ever heard from the three friends. It was just before midday on the 22nd of August, 40 hours after the yacht had left Bembridge, that a fishing boat recovered from the sea the body of a man around 10 miles south of the Isle of Wight. He was wearing a manually inflated life jacket and yachtsman's clothing. There was no ID on the body, so the emergency services released a description of the man, hoping that someone would come forward. Later that evening, a woman contacted the police and informed them that she was concerned as the description sounded like her partner, James Meeby, and she hadn't heard from him since he left Bembridge aboard the Ouzo. And the terrible news was soon confirmed. Concerned for the other two friends on board the Ouzo, the emergency services then began a large-scale search for the boat and the sailors. And at 9 o'clock in the evening of the 23rd of August, the bodies of Jason Downer and Rupert Saunders were also recovered, again with their life jackets inflated, from the sea about 9 miles further west from where the body of James was found. But despite a thorough search of the area, there was no sign at all of their boat, the Ouzo. Quite what had happened was unclear. Had there been an explosion on board? This seemed unlikely, as there was nothing about the bodies to suggest this. Had the yacht suffered a technical failure? Possible, but unlikely on such a well-cared-for yacht in the relatively benign conditions. No distress call was made from the yacht, which led coastguards to believe that the boat may have been in a collision with a larger vessel. The Marine Accident Investigation Branch, using various forms of data, was able to identify all of the large vessels which had been in the area close to the Ouzo on that night, and they were asked to give their voyage data to investigators. The information from one of the vessels, the P&O car ferry Pride of Bilbao, revealed that she'd been involved in an incident with a small yacht about 6 miles south of St. Catherine's Point early in the morning of the 21st of August. This yacht surely had to have been the Ouzo. Had this collision led to the sinking of the yacht and the death of the 3 men? The Pride of Bilbao was one of the largest ferries operating in UK waters, providing a scheduled service between Portsmouth and Bilbao in northern Spain throughout the year, and this vessel had been operating on this route for about 13 years. It wouldn't have been the first time that this giant car ferry had almost been involved in an accident with a yacht. In August 2000, just after 10 p.m, the ferry was heading for a collision with a small craft until it changed its course less than 1 mile from the yacht. And these ferries, they're not manoeuvrable at all. The crew of the yacht in question told of their horror as they saw this huge ferry speeding directly at them. They shone a light on their sails to alert the ferry to their presence, and it was this that got them spotted and caused the ferry to change course. But even altering course from a mile out, the two vessels passed in a worrying 200 yards of each other. That's pretty close, isn't it? The Pride of Bilbao later apologised for the incident, saying that it had lost the yacht on its radar. 2 weeks after the Ouzo disappeared, Michael Hubble, the Pride of Bilbao's 61-year-old second officer, and the officer of the watch when the Ouzo went missing, was arrested on suspicion of manslaughter. He'd spent his life at sea, beginning his career at the age of 16, and from 1987, he'd sailed on a number of cross-channel ferries before retiring in 2006. But though he no longer worked for P&O as a permanent member of staff, he'd worked on board via an agency, and that is why he was on the bridge on the night in question. In October 2007, his trial began at Winchester Crown Court. For an account of this court case, I would draw heavily on an excellent article in the Financial Times by Tom de Castella in August 2008. Like all my sources, you can see the link under the first comment. The dispute in the court case was simple. The prosecution suggested the ferry had not seen the yacht and had either collided with it or passed so close that the bow waves created by the powerful ferry would have swamped and sunk the Ouzo. The defence agreed that the ferry had been involved in an incident, but with another yacht. It had been recorded in the ship's log, but they argued that this boat wasn't the Ouzo. They believed that another large vessel must have collided with the Ouzo elsewhere in the English Channel, and there was one in the vicinity at the time, a huge 88-metre tanker called the Crescent Bayonne, which on the evening in question was sailing east to west across the English Channel. And the defence found an expert, can always find an expert, able to suggest that the Ouzo could have been close to the tanker, and it was a collision between those two boats that led to the loss of the Ouzo. But despite all the arguments made in court, the pivotal point in the trial came when the captain of the Crescent Bayonne admitted that he had not the required lookouts on deck that evening, so he was breaking the law. This meant he couldn't say for sure that his craft hadn't collided with the ouzo. And many observers at the trial felt that this news meant that Michael Hubble could not be found guilty, and indeed after a 6-week trial, the jury acquitted Hubble of manslaughter. So legally, no one was responsible for the death of the 3 men. However, in April 2007, the Marine Accident Investigation Branch published their independent report, which can't be used for legal purposes. Its only purpose is to prevent future accidents. And they concluded the following. After careful analysis of the facts, we are of the firm opinion that the yacht was ouzo and the Pride of Bilbao had collided with her or passed so close that she had been swamped or capsized by the vessel's wash. But what about the tanker? Didn't the court case show it wasn't looking where it was going? Not so. The officer of the watch was there, and he'd have been doing collision avoidance and navigation, but they didn't have the legally required second person on the bridge. De Castella put together what could have happened if this investigation was correct, and ouzo did collide with the ferry. Approaching 1 a.m., the ouzo's crew would have seen the ferry approaching them, and being local sailors, they knew which ferry it was. The ferry would have been about a kilometre off their port side, and they wouldn't have realised that once the ferry had passed the Isle of Wight, it would very slowly turn west, so slowly so that passengers on board did not feel any discomfort, and this process of turning took 3 minutes, so would not have been apparent to the crew of the ouzo until it was heading straight for them. And the ferry then increased its power, heading full steam ahead. We then head to the bridge of the side of the Bilbao, where the crew didn't see any yachts on their radar systems. But at 1:07 a.m, the lookout spotted a white light on the starboard bow, almost certainly the light of the ouzo. The second officer, Michael Hubble, steered the ferry to starboard in an attempt to avoid a collision. When they then saw a light astern after this, it was confirmation in the mind of Hubble that the yacht was clear of his stern and it was safe for him to bring the vessel back around onto her original course. The accident report suggests it's possible that the ouzo's light stayed on for a while despite the boat being in distress, with possibly her crew already washed overboard. Seeing that light certainly did not confirm her crew was safe. They strongly recommended that a large vessel should never assume the small craft is safe just from seeing a light astern. The investigators believe the Pride of Bilbao passed within 10 metres of the yacht. Experts suggested that the sheer wall of water from the ferry's bow wave would have crashed over the yacht's low stern, straight down the hatchway, which would have been open on such a pleasant evening. It was estimated that just 10 to 30% of the hull being flooded would be enough for a capsize, and it's been suggested it could have sunk in just a few minutes. And what happened next? The 3 sailors were all in the water with their life jackets on, watching the ferry sail away. The men would have hoped that the ferry would turn around and effect a rescue, or maybe they'd alert the Coast Guard, and they'd have expected to hear maybe a helicopter approaching. The Coast Guard later said they could have been on the scene in under an hour, in just 50 minutes, and the Bembridge lifeboat could have been there in just over an hour. If the ferry had stopped and used its lights to illuminate the water, there was a good chance the men would have been found and saved. But when nothing like that had happened, what options were there for them? They all knew the tide was pushing them out to sea and trying to swim against it was futile. So it was just a matter of staying alive in these busy shipping lanes and hoping and praying that another vessel would come close, see them, and rescue them. It was found that Rupert and James had survived for at least 3 hours in the water before drowning. James remained alive for at least 12 hours before dying from hypothermia. It's likely they would have tried to stay together, as there was more chance of being found that way. Their bodies would have rapidly adjusted to the cold. The water temperature at the time was about 18 degrees. And initially the fall in their body temperature would have taken some time. But after this, reflex shivering would have started after a while, at first in short bursts, and then continuously. And with a force 5 breeze and lots of swell, the men would have swallowed a lot of seawater. As James survived so much longer, it seems this was due to his life jacket being tightened correctly. Did he watch his friends die? And how would he have survived that cold night? But as first light approached on that summer morning, he must have thought there was a good chance that rescue would arrive, but it never came, and he succumbed to hypothermia around lunchtime. P&O has never made any contact at all with the families of the three men, with one source saying, "I think the view was that once Mr. Hubble was cleared, P&O's connection to the case ended." And as for Michael Hubble, he never worked for P&O again. And finally, no trace of the ouzo has ever been found. So there we have it. Three men with everything to live for lost their lives in a terrible and just such a frightening manner. But still now, as I record this in October 2025, nobody and no organisation has been held responsible for this tragedy. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you found it of interest. If so, please do watch one of my others. Until next time, I've been Adam Lloyd.